Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into a genuinely massive historical anomaly. Just picture this for a second. 7 ancient civilizations. They're separated by thousands of miles, completely distinct languages, and entirely different cultures. No contact with one another whatsoever, yet all 7 of them revered the exact same plant. And they didn't just document it as a useful material, but as a literal bridge to divine awareness. I mean, how does that happen? Well, in this explainer, we're going to look at a fascinating multidisciplinary report by Anthony Eichner Alvarez titled Cannabis, the Sacred Plant, which investigates this exact phenomenon.
Okay, let's dive into this investigative journey through history, biology, and 20th century policy. We'll be looking at 1. The ancient consensus, 2. The biblical connection, 3. The biology of bliss, 4. The architecture of prohibition, and 5. Intention and focus.
Starting off with Section 1, the ancient consensus, 10,000 years of history. The source report points out that humanity's relationship with this plant isn't some modern trend. It actually goes all the way back to the Neolithic period. We're talking at least 10,000 years. Long before any institution had the power to label it dangerous, it was simply a natural companion to human life.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how deep that relationship goes. The linguistic root of the word itself traveled right alongside human beings across continents. We start with the ancient Hebrew root kanah, which means reed or stalk. That travels into Syriac as kunapa, Arabic as kunab, and eventually Greek as cannabis. The plant's ancient footprint is literally baked right into the linguistics of human history.
What's absolutely wild here is the sheer scale of this anomaly. These distinct civilizations independently identified this plant as a spiritual tool. In India, the Atharva Veda classified it as a liberator and a sacred plant of Lord Shiva. The Scythian nomads used it in ritual vaporization, and that was actually corroborated by archaeological finds that match the ancient historian Herodotus. In Egypt, the Ebers Papyrus documented its use in temples, and over in China, Shen Nung's Pharmacopoeia recorded its use by shamans for healing. They didn't just see it as fiber or food, they saw it as a technology for consciousness.
The report summarizes this beautifully, stating, every major ancient culture that encountered cannabis concluded the same thing. This plant thins the wall between the ordinary mind and the divine mind. They were 4,000 years ahead of the neuroscience. And as the author notes, the intellectually honest response to this overwhelming historical consensus isn't to just dismiss it, but to really ask why.
That question brings us to Section 2, the biblical connection, the hidden sacrament. Here we examine a linguistic case that could fundamentally reshape how we view biblical history and ancient Hebrew traditions.
According to Exodus chapter 30, God instructed Moses to make a holy anointing oil. Now, this wasn't just any oil. It was specifically formulated to consecrate the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, and the priests and kings of Israel. The recipe contained 5 very specific ingredients: myrrh, cinnamon, cassia, olive oil, and a mysterious ingredient known in ancient Hebrew as Kaneh-Bosm.
So you might be wondering, what exactly is Kaneh-Bosm? Well, anthropologist and entomologist Sula Bennett identified this ancient Hebrew term as translating to aromatic reed or stalk, which is the exact botanical structure of cannabis. Bennett's research suggests it was later mistranslated in the Greek Septuagint as calamus, which is just a common marsh plant. But Kaneh, as we established earlier, is the very root of the word cannabis. The report points out that since these oil-based compounds absorb transdermally right through the skin, the repeated anointing of ancient priests likely produced highly meaningful psychoactive and spiritual effects.
Let's see how this builds into Section 3, the biology of bliss, the endocannabinoid. We're pivoting from ancient scriptural texts to a massive biological discovery made in the 1990s, a discovery that suggests the ancients were actually biologically correct all along.
This is literally the biological aha moment of the report, the endocannabinoid system. It turns out, your brain has a dedicated system of receptors, CB1 and CB2, found throughout your entire nervous system. And get this system predates human evolution by 600 million years. Think about that for a second. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that our brains weren't built to respond to a random external plant. It's the other way around. The plant produces compounds that perfectly match a receptor system we already evolved to possess.
But here is where it just gets incredible. When scientists discovered the human body's own naturally produced endocannabinoid molecule, the specific one released during peak experiences, creative flow, and deep meditation, they obviously had to name it. They chose anandamide. This comes directly from the ancient Sanskrit word ananda, which means bliss or joy. Modern science literally had to borrow exact ancient vocabulary to name the body's native bliss molecule.
So how does this relate to the spiritual experiences described by those ancient cultures? It comes down to the default mode network, or DMN. These are the brain regions that light up when you're mind-wandering, worrying about tomorrow, or self-referencing. Neurologically speaking, the DMN is essentially the seat of the ego and the narrative self. The report details how cannabis, particularly at higher doses and in contemplative settings, modulates this network, temporarily loosening the tight boundaries of the ego. Which brings us to this amazing vocabulary matchup. For thousands of years, ancient mystics used terms like fana in Sufism, moksha in Hinduism, and samadhi in yoga to describe the dissolution of the separate self. Today, modern neuroscientists look at brain scans and call it default mode network suppression or ego dissolution. They're describing the exact same physiological event. The ancients just didn't need an fMRI machine to figure it out.
And that brings us to a major plot twist in Section 4, the architecture of prohibition, architecture of control.
Because, the obvious question is, if our bodies are literally biologically built with a receptor system for this, and it was revered globally for millennia, why did it become so heavily criminalized worldwide in the 20th century? The source neutrally lays out the timeline of this criminalization, noting that the plant was actually fully legal and included in the U.S. Pharmacopoeia until the 1930s. The shift began in 1937 with the Marijuana Tax Act, driven heavily by Federal Bureau of Narcotics Director Harry Anslinger. Even though the Supreme Court ruled that Tax Act unconstitutional in 1969, Congress rapidly followed up in 1970 by placing it on Schedule 1, which is the highest possible restriction category, right alongside heroin. And then, a major revelation occurred in 2016 regarding the motivations behind these exact policies.
So the crucial point is captured in a 2016 public admission by John Ehrlichman, a domestic policy advisor to President Nixon. He stated, "We knew we could make it illegal to be either against the Vietnam War or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities." The historical record, impartially presented in the source, makes it clear that the architecture of prohibition was largely driven by manufactured fear and targeted political disruption, not public safety.
Let's move to our final section, Section 5, Intention and Focus. Integration. Here, the report focuses on the main takeaway, how modern and ancient traditions actually interact with the plant practically, and what we can learn from them.
The distinction that really matters across all these sacred traditions, from Hindu sadhus to Rastafari elders, is the hard line they draw between intentional use and habitual use. Intentional use treats it as a contemplative tool. It emphasizes set and setting, preparation, and deep focus. It's about entering a state to do inner work. Habitual use, on the other hand, uses it recreationally as an escape from consciousness, which the report notes can lead to avoidance and cognitive fog. The difference isn't the plant. The difference is the human's relationship to the experience. A perfectly clear example of this intentionality is the living Rastafari tradition, which utilizes a highly coherent scriptural theology. They look to Genesis, where seed-bearing plants are given to humanity, Psalm 104 regarding plants for people to cultivate, and Revelation 22 citing leaves for the healing of the nations. In this tradition, the holy herb is never used as a recreational toy. It's used with immense respect to open up deep communal reasoning and spiritual insight. Alvarez captures this profound realization perfectly at the end of his report. He writes, "Cannabis did not give me a spiritual experience, it gave me the silence in which I could finally hear one. The difference matters. The plant is a door. What is behind the door was always already there." It's such a powerful framing. The plant is merely a vehicle that quiets the noise of the ego. The wisdom, the connection, the biology of bliss, it was all always native to the human body. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to consider today. If liberation is really just the uncovering of what is already biologically and spiritually true inside us, what could we learn if we approach the natural world with intention instead of fear? It's a question that challenges both our history and our future. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the evidence, and I'll catch you in the next one.